Here are some of the best updated and upgraded decks in Pokemon TCG Pocket. Alright, so Mythical Island came out about a week, 2 weeks ago now. I forget, I lose track of time all the time, but a bunch of new cards were released that made not only a bunch of new decks really good, but made old decks a lot better. That's what we're going to take a look at today. We're going to be taking a look at 3 of the most popular decks from last format of Genetic Apex, and we're going to be updating them and upgrading them and making them a whole lot better, utilizing all of the new cards that came out in Mythical Island. So, the first deck that we're going to take a look at today is probably the best deck, or one of the best decks from the Genetic Apex format, which is going to be Mewtwo EX with Gardevoir. This deck actually is a whole lot better now, mainly for the inclusion of 3 different cards. People think 2, but there is a 3rd card in this updated deck list that makes it a lot better. But the first card that we're going to talk about, that we're going to be updating with Mewtwo, is Mew EX. So we all know what Mew EX is. When people saw this card, they knew that it would be thrown into Mewtwo EX and it would be really good. The idea with Mew EX is that it would help cover some specific matchups that Mewtwo EX struggled with, mainly being Charizard EX. Charizard EX saw a large influx in play towards the end of the Genetic Apex format, and that was because it had a really good matchup against Mewtwo, and Mewtwo was the most dominant deck for a long time in the previous format. However, Mew EX with genome hacking, its second attack for 3 colorless energies, can copy Charizard EX's attack, one-shot Charizard in place where Mewtwo EX can't, even for 4 energies. So it was really apparent that at least throwing 1 copy of Mew EX in Mewtwo would cover some of the matchup spreads that struggled against Mewtwo, but also giving it a backup attacker. Once your first Mewtwo goes down, Mew EX can come in for only 3 energies instead of 4, so it's a little bit easier to set up, can at least take KOs or finish KOs in a lot of different scenarios. However, the one card that came out in Mythical Island that made Mewtwo EX so much better and made Psychic type decks so much better in general was Mythical Slab. And Mythical Slab is an item card that allows you to look at the top card of your deck, and if it is a Psychic Pokemon, any Psychic Pokemon, a Basic or an Evolution Psychic Pokemon, you can put it into your hand, and if it's not, you just put that card on the bottom of your deck. This allows us to kind of move through all of our cards in our deck much more quickly rather. So think about it like this, like we already have 2 research, which is draw 2 cards, like 2 copies of Professor's Research, that is, and then we have 2 Pokeballs, which is, again, just pull a basic Pokemon out of your deck. In this deck, we're running 5 basic Pokemon, which is pretty consistent. That means we're probably going to start with 1 or 2 in our hand, and every time we Pokeball, we're probably going to find the basic Pokemon that we're looking for. It makes it that much easier for us to find our Ralts. But with Mythical Slab, it was basically another way for us to move through our deck. Now, yes, sometimes you're going to put a Giovanni or a Sabrina or a Leaf, or maybe even a Professor's Research on the bottom of your deck because it's not a Psychic Pokemon, and that can feel bad sometimes with Mythical Slab. However, you gotta realize that that's 1 more card in your deck closer to finding that Psychic type Pokemon that you're looking for, right? So it's just another way to move through your deck a little bit quickly. It's better than Red Card in a lot of scenarios, so it just made the deck a lot more faster paced, a lot more consistent, and made drawing into our Curlias and our Gardevoirs that much easier. Before, there was no way to do that other than just drawing in with research or just drawing for turn and drawing into your Curlia or your Gardevoir. Now, Mewtwo EX is even faster paced, it's even more consistent, and it makes the deck a whole lot better. Also, the inclusion of Leaf. So Leaf is a great new supporter card. Again, decreases your Pokemon's retreat cost by 2 this turn. Now, this is really strong because a lot of times Mewtwo EX would keep a 1 copy of Mewtwo in the active spot, and then it would have a second Mewtwo on the bench. You would probably elect to attach your energies to the benched Mewtwo because it was just safer that way, and then the Mewtwo in the active spot would just take a bunch of hits because Mewtwo has a lot of HP, especially for a basic Pokemon, 150, so it was a really good tanking option, but there wasn't a really consistent way to move it in and out of the active spot. Now we have Leaf to be able to do that with just 1 card instead of having to attach an energy to the Mewtwo, again making the deck a little bit more consistent, flow a little bit quicker, and a little bit better. Before I talk a little bit more about the matchups of the deck now and how it's doing right now in this format, I want to talk about the way to play Mythical Slab and the sequencing. Sequencing refers to, the order of which we play certain cards. In Pokemon TCG, the official Pokemon TCG and Pokemon TCG Pocket, it's important to know which cards you should be playing before others. So here is sort of my breakdown of Mythical Slab and how we should be using it. So in the scenario where you are looking to draw a specific Evolution Psychic type Pokemon, the best thing to do would be to play a Pokeball first. That way, you're decreasing the likelihood of which you're gonna draw or find a basic Pokemon with Mythical Slab. And then you would play Mythical Slab to see what that top card of the deck is. And then after Mythical Slab, we would rather play Professor's Research. So that's the sequence, the proper sequence if we're looking for an Evolution Pokemon. We play Pokeball, then we play Slab, and then we would play Research. We play typically you want to play your targeted draw before your non-targeted draw. but that's not always the case. Now, if we're looking for just any Pokemon, either a basic or not, then yes, it would make sense to play Slab and then play Pokeball and then play Research. Or if you're just looking to see the most cards possible, you could play, your Slab or your Pokeballs before you play Research, or play Research and then play Pokeball and Slab. So the sequencing is important depending on what cards you're looking for, but there are a lot of different configurations that sort of change the statistics of the odds very slightly, in which, it increases your odds to find whatever kind of type of Pokemon that you're looking for. But yeah, this Mewtwo deck right now is a lot better. In fact, Mewtwo EX has been the most played deck in Pokemon TCG Pocket since Mythical Island came out. It just has so much going for it. There are a lot of Pokemon right now that saw a rise that were pretty good against Mewtwo EX. Gyarados was one of them. It was another deck that wasn't super fast paced, and neither was Mewtwo, so they were both kind of setup decks. However, Gyarados has 180 HP. It hits for 140, but you have that Druddigon, which can be really annoying. So it made that matchup a little bit more awkward. And Gyarados is just a really strong card. I would still say the matchup was pretty 50-50. We still had Mew EX to do some quick damage. And overall, I do think that Mewtwo EX drew cards a little bit more consistently. Even though Gyarados relied on only a Stage 1 Pokemon to get evolved, where Mewtwo relies on a Stage 2 Pokemon to evolve, that being Gardevoir. It was still a little bit quicker pace. I do think that Mewtwo, in fact, is a more consistent deck than Gyarados in its overall setup. It doesn't necessarily rely on any one Pokemon being in the active spot. We do have a Mew EX, which has a retreat cost of 1. It also has an attack for only 1 energy. Mewtwo EX, again, a lot of HP that can sit in front of the active spot, and we can move it out with Leaf. So yeah, Mewtwo EX right now remains the most played deck in most of the online tournaments, and its win rate typically falls pretty close to around 50-50, which doesn't sound that good, but it is actually really good if you think about it in a large sample size. Being the most played deck means that you're going up against the most different decks in all of these online tournaments, so it basically means that Mewtwo has a very even matchup spread across the board. However, just because its average win rate is close to 50-50, that doesn't mean that there aren't people that draw exceptionally well or get lucky throughout a tournament, or play very well, rather, right? A combination of the two to any degree, and then they're going to end up being at the top of the standings at the end of those tournaments, which we often see. There's pretty much always a Mewtwo sitting within the top 8, top 4, and oftentimes in the top 2 or top 1 spot of all of these online tournaments. So Mewtwo EX is one of the strongest decks still in the game right now, and I think it's gotten a lot better in so many different ways. Now, there are different ways to play Mewtwo EX other than just the list that I'm showing here. So of course, this is just an example, probably the most common version of Mewtwo EX that people are choosing to play right now, the most common, most consistent 20 card list that we see in these online tournaments. However, one thing that we could do here is play a second copy of Mew EX. We could cut something like one of these X Speeds or one of the Giovannis and basically run some of the new Budding Expeditioner cards as well. This allows us to pick up our Mew from the active spot and put it right back into our hand, fully healing it. Again, it gives the deck a little bit more bounce, flexibility, depending on what Pokemon is in the active spot. This list here is only running 1 copy of Leaf with 2 copies of X Speed, so you could also just play 2 Leaf and 1 X Speed, or you could play another Mewtwo, cut an X Speed, play a Budding Expeditioner. So there's a lot of different configurations there, little, tweaks that we can make to this deck list depending on what your preferences are. I do think Budding Expeditioner is really strong. However, I do think that the main strategy with Mew EX should still be to play through Mewtwo EX, rather. Because it is sort of still the bread and butter of the deck. That 150 damage is just 150 no matter how you slice it. Mew EX can be good in certain matchups, but I think the deck should be still focused around Mewtwo. And there are other decks that focus around Mew EX, but yeah, Mewtwo EX still one of the strongest cards in the game, so I think that should be sort of the primary option in this particular deck list. So this is just the 20 card list that I chose to show. I think that it showcases kind of everything that the new version of Mewtwo is good with, and includes a lot of the new cards. So yeah, this is my way to update Mewtwo EX. Next, we're going to take a look at my favorite deck to play in Pokemon TCG Pocket, and it has been since last format, and that is Pikachu EX with Lieutenant Surge and Raichu and Electabuzz. All of the new great cards that came out in Mythical Island are included here, at least electric type cards, and that being the new Pikachu. No, the small Pikachu, not Pikachu EX, but just the single prize Pikachu that came out in Mythical Island, along with the new Dedenne card and the new Electabuzz card. And these are cards that have really specific purposes that are all actually really good, and they fit perfectly in Pikachu EX. So Pikachu EX has really 2 top ways to be played right now. I think a lot of people are playing it with Zebstrika. That's probably the most played version of Pikachu EX, at least right now in this Mythical Island format. But I think the main reason for that is because it's a little bit more aggro, and it has the Zebstrika ability to attack and do damage to your opponent's bench Pokemon, which is really good against the Gyarados deck. So I think that it makes sense that Zebstrika might be the most played version of Pikachu right now, because Gyarados has emerged as sort of a top 3 deck in the format right now. But right now, also, it's kind of become a counter meta. So if you look at the top rankings of all of the recent online tournaments, it's all decks that have sort of countered Gyarados, right? Gyarados has been very dominant, but because it's very much an anti-meta right now, we don't necessarily see a lot of Gyarados in the top 8, but we see it sort of a lot in like the top 32 or top 16. So I think it's probably going to even out a little bit more so. Gyarados right now is either the 3rd or 4th most played deck. I think people realize that it's exceptionally strong, but a lot of people are playing to counter Gyarados, so it's probably going to go back down and play a little bit, and things will even out eventually. But I do think that Raichu, this Lieutenant Surge with Raichu version of Pikachu, is the most overall consistently best deck for playing Pikachu EX with the best sort of matchup spread. It does a little bit of everything, and it does it all pretty good. So the new Pikachu that came out in Mythical Island is actually a really good aggro card in its own right. I think it's by far sort of the best version of Pikachu right now. The old Pikachu was still pretty good. 1 energy does 20 damage. That is still enough to damage or 1-hit KO a Magikarp in the active spot. So you can play the old Pikachu, but the new Pikachu is even better. It has the basically has the ability to do more damage for just 1 energy. It has the Circle Circuit attack similar to Pikachu EX, so the more bench Pokemon that we have, the more damage that this Pokemon does. But 30 damage for 1 energy on a basic Pikachu is pretty darn good. It allows us to attack on our first turn if we need to with a basic Pokemon that we fit into the active spot. Now, there is a new Raichu card that came out in Mythical Island, and this Raichu card is really interesting. It does, I think, like 60 or 80 damage to your opponent's active Pokemon, and then it does 20 damage to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon, and this is a good card. I mean, this is a new Raichu that is strong. It does a lot of damage. Bench damage is pretty good right now in the format. However, you gotta understand that when you hit your opponent's bench Pokemon, you don't hit for weakness. Also, Blue is a card that is floating around right now, the new supporter card Blue, which reduces all of the damage done to all of your Pokemon on your next turn by 10. So it can counter Raichu a little bit. But overall, I think that with the inclusion of the new Electabuzz card, we don't necessarily need to play that new Raichu. So I still think that playing the Raichu from Genetic Apex is better, which just does 140 damage to the active spot. It gives Pikachu EX a little bit more flexibility, being able to take sort of a big, KO here on an active Pokemon with a lot of HP, something otherwise that Pikachu really struggled with for the most part. We're still running 2 copies of Pikachu EX for sure, and then we can still run a copy of Zapdos as well. However, we are running one of the new Dedenne, and this new Dedenne card is really cool. It kind of fits the purpose that Pincurchin did in the Genetic Apex format. Pincurchin for 2 energies did 30 damage with a 50-50 chance to paralyze. Dedenne has less HP, does less damage, only 10 damage on its attack. But for 1 energy, we also have a 50-50 chance to paralyze our opponent's Pokemon, which is really strong. And that's sort of the main reason why we're playing Dedenne. There are some times we're doing just a little bit of chip damage or stalling for a turn or two can be the difference in you winning a game. So the ability to do that for only 1 energy rather than 2 makes the deck a little bit more consistent, at least in that option, right? When those scenarios come up where we have to stall for a turn or 2, we would rather kind of have the flexibility to do it for only 1 energy. And again, it's also a pretty good Pokemon to just leave into the active spot, right? If we want to build up a Raichu or build up a Pikachu or a Zapdos, we can just keep a Dedenne in the active spot and get lucky for a few turns, flip a few heads on our Thunder Shock and paralyze our opponent, and put ourselves in a pretty good position to kind of come in. So it is sort of definitely an RNG card, but it's that backup option, and it's also a pretty fun card to lead off a battle with, especially if you're going second. Now, we need to mention the new Electabuzz card. So Pikachu and Raichu was a deck in last format, right? Don't get me wrong, it was really good in Genetic Apex. And Electabuzz was a card, but it wasn't that good of a card, the one from Genetic Apex. So the new one that came out of Mythical Island has the Thunder Spear attack, which for 2 lightning energies allows us to do 40 damage to one of our opponent's Pokemon. This can be the active or the bench Pokemon, so it is flexible. It also works with Lieutenant Surge. People might have forgotten that Lieutenant Surge allows us to move all of our electric energies from our bench Pokemon to our active Raichu or Electabuzz cards. And this gives this deck a lot more flexibility. It basically means that we can kind of finish off games by either taking a big KO in the active spot with Raichu or KO kind of sniping a bench Pokemon with Electabuzz. And it's only 2 energy, so it's a little bit easier to set up than Raichu as well. But that 40 damage can come in clutch, especially right now with Magikarps being so, our Gyarados is being so common in the format. Being able to KO an early Magikarp before it evolves is really strong. So again, just another option that this Pikachu deck is able to do. This deck is running all new Pokemon. Now, the thing is, all of the Pokemon in our deck all have a retreat cost of 1, so we don't don't need to play Leaf. We can just play X-Speed. And other than the new Pokemon, there's no new supporter cards or anything crazy that we want to include in this list. So we still have room for 2 Research, 2 Sabrina, and 2 Lieutenant Surge, with the X-Beats, the Pokeballs, and then even potions kind of thrown in here. You could play an X card, you could play a red card in line of those potions, but I think overall, this Pikachu deck is super versatile. It has so many different options and routes that you can go throughout the game, and we still have the very consistent Pikachu EX to just do damage on turn 2, 90 damage. It's just a really fast-paced, really quality tempo deck. In fact, I think it's probably still the best tempo deck in the game right now, and with the incline of Gyarados EX, Pikachu has been a very well-positioned deck in the metagame right now. I think that Raichu with Electabuzz helps in a lot of different matchups as well, Dedenne as well, so it has a pretty decent matchup still against things like Mewtwo and Fire-type decks as well, we're all kind of doing really well against in general. So I really like Pikachu. I think that, at least for right now, it's probably going to remain a little bit less played than the Zebstrika variant. I didn't include the Zebstrika variant of Pikachu, but mainly because the deck list is kind of the exact same as it was in Genetic Apex. Zebstrika Pikachu isn't really running anything new, so I didn't want to include that because it's the same deck as it was before. You could run one of the new Dedenne in it, I suppose, but for the most part, it's the exact same deck. So I wanted to focus on Lieutenant Surge with Pikachu and Raichu with Pikachu, because this is sort of the version that's been updated the most, and it has been upgraded a significant degree, similar to how Mewtwo was upgraded. So yeah, I really like Pikachu. I think it's going to be better as time goes on. Its matchup spread is a little bit better across the board than Zebstrika. Even though Zebstrika is a little bit more tailored to the Gyarados matchup, I do think that Raichu is overall a stronger card and is going to be better for you in a variety of different matchups. Okay, now the last one we're going to talk about is the Moltres deck, or the Fire deck. Now, there are basically 2 different ways to play with Moltres, at least at the moment, and that is with either focusing on Arcanine or Charizard. Now, the Charizard version of the Moltres Fire-type decks hasn't really changed at all. It's the same exact list as it was in Genetic Apex, so I don't really want to include that. It's very good still. I think Charizard actually has a pretty decent position in the metagame right now. It does good still against Mewtwo from a decent degree, and it does good against Gyarados as well, which is actually a little bit more surprising. But Arcanine is actually really good. In my opinion, it's the best Fire-type deck to play right now, and that's because Arcanine has a really good pace. It has a really good tempo as far as Fire decks go, so it is strong in a lot of different matchups. 120 damage for 3 energies on a stage 1 is really good, especially considering that we can get those 3 energies onto this Arcanine really quickly with the Inferno Dance ability with Moltres. So Arcanine was just really good. It was underrated as far as tempo decks go, especially in Genetic Apex. However, now we can pair it with Mew EX, similar to how we're pairing it, or putting Mew EX with Mewtwo. And throwing Mew EX in Arcanine is interesting. It's not something that I actually ever thought of when I saw Mew EX, or when I kind of envisioned what this new metagame would look like in Mythical Island, but it actually makes a ton of sense. And the reason for that is because, again, Arcanine is really consistent, pretty quick, fast-paced damage with Inferno Onrush. However, 120 isn't necessarily KOing a lot of sort of the bigger setup and sweep Pokemon in the game right now. Things like Gyarados, things like Mewtwo, things like maybe Executor, I don't even know. Actually, it's probably better to use Executor than Mew, or Arcanine than Mew against Executor, but there are those matchups, rather, that Arcanine isn't necessarily your best option for, like in the scenarios where maybe you would rather have a Charizard EX than an Arcanine. We don't have to run all of the Pokemon to build up a Charizard. We can actually just run Mew EX and copy whatever our opponent's Pokemon is. So Mewtwo EX in this version of the deck is kind of a revenge attacker and sort of a secondary option for those matchups where, the kind of the faster pace but smaller amount of damage aspect of Arcanine isn't necessarily as good. It's also a great backup attacker, and it makes the deck flow a little bit better where, yes, we want to keep Moltres in the active spot, and we're going to use our Inferno Dance to accelerate energies onto Arcanine, but in that process, we can kind of decide to manually attach our energies to a Mew EX on the bench and kind of build up both Pokemon at the same time, and it gives this deck 2 different kind of routes that you can go, right? You can kind of invest energies or your time into either an Arcanine or a Mew EX, depending on the matchup, and it gives the deck a lot more flexibility without sacrificing consistency, because again, we only need to run 1 copy of Mew EX. It's a basic Pokemon, and its potential is basically infinite. It can fit in so many different deck lists, so it's important to realize that Mew EX does a lot for Arcanine while only having to include really 1 card. But since we are running 1 copy of Mew EX, why not run 1 copy of the new Budding Expeditioner? It allows us to kind of keep our Mew EX in the active spot, take a few hits, scoop it back up into our hand, and retreat basically without having to, worry about it getting KO'd. We can fully heal it, which is always really, really nice. And since this deck isn't running a lot of Pokemon, we're only running actually 5 total basic Pokemon, 2 of those being Moltres, 2 being Growlithe, 1 being Mew EX. It's a lot more consistent for us, or likely for us, to start with a Moltres EX in the active spot, or just go into Moltres EX to find enough a Pokeball right early in the game. Same with Growlithe. So the deck flows pretty consistently, and we have a lot of room to run basically any kind of supporter card that we would need in a game, being, you know, Research, Pokeball, Leaf, also Budding Expeditioner. We even have 1 copy of Sabrina and Giovanni in the deck. And then we have 2 Potion and 1 red card. Potion actually does come in handy in a few different scenarios. The way the math kind of works out in the format right now, Arcanine does 20 damage to itself after you attack. So it basically says, hey, listen, like, I'm going to attack you probably before you're able to set up and attack me. Yes, I'm doing damage to myself, but I can counteract that by playing Potion on my Arcanine and just kind of get this 120 rolling turn after turn without having as much of a drawback. In a deck, or in a scenario where you're kind of outpacing your opponent significantly, if you get 2 chances to attack with Inferno Onrush before they get set up, that is going to put you pretty low on HP, especially if you're attacking into a Druddigon. Your HP can go down pretty darn quickly, which is why I think Potion is in fact pretty good in this deck. It kind of keeps you safe in a lot of different scenarios. And again, we even have room for 1 red card. I think that red card is good in tempo decks like this that maybe struggle against the really sort of slower but, like, you know, larger build-up decks, things like a Gyarados or a Mewtwo, red card, or Charizard rather. A red card is definitely really good. So the combination of red card and Mew makes this deck and its matchup spread against sort of those setup and sweep mid-range decks a little bit better, which is why I think it's pretty darn cool. So yeah, this, in my opinion, is the best fire type deck right now. It's interesting, like, Charizard is good, so we could see sort of a rise, but I think that as far as sort of setup and sweep decks go, Charizard is kind of like the one that counters other setup decks, but it's a lot better, or a lot worse rather, against aggro and tempo decks, just because it is so like difficult to consistently get it set up. It's very strong once it's set up, Charizard is, but again, it's just a little bit more inconsistent. You need a stage 3 Pokemon, or stage 2 rather, with 4 energies onto it. So not only do you need to start with your Moltres in the active spot, but you also need to, you know, flip heads on your Inferno Dance, and you need to draw into your Charmeleon and your Charizard. There's a lot of things that need to happen for your Charizard to get set up and for that deck to be really strong. Arcanine needs a lot less for that to happen. It's only a stage 1 Pokemon, only needs 3 HP, and there's less Pokemon in the deck in general. However, like I said, Charizard with Arcanine is still pretty prominent right now. It's still a strong deck, and it's still possibly going to win some games, so it can be a good option for you. But in my opinion, Moltres with Arcanine and Mew is the best fire type deck in the game right now. Okay, so these were the 3 best decks from previous format, or the previous format with Genetic Apex, that I wanted to showcase in this video, that I wanted to update and upgrade and show you sort of how they've gotten better, talk about them a little bit, and talk about their new position in the meta with all of these new upgraded cards. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching. Please like the video, please subscribe. The support on the channel has been incredible, and I really appreciate that. So if you guys could comment below what your opinions are, you know, how are you playing Mewtwo? How are you playing Pikachu? How are you playing Arcanine? Do you think that these decks are better or worse positioned than they were before? And how are you, how are you choosing to upgrade and update these new or old decks in this new format? I would really love to hear it. So comment below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I've been Maddie, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace out.